We're live.
Welcome, everybody, back to the House General and Housing Committee. It is Friday, April 4th. All day. And today we are going to continue our process of hearing H-169, an act relating to amending prohibitions against discrimination in public accommodation housing. We have two witnesses, and then we'll at least commence committee discussion, which I know will continue into next week. So our first witness is Big Hartman, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Human Rights Commission. Big, you want to introduce yourself and take it away?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me in today. My name is Big Hartman. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you about this really important legislation that you're considering. I did prepare written testimony, which is not always my style, but I thought it was merited in this case. The mission of the Human Rights Commission is to advance full civil and human rights in Vermont. So our office primarily is engaged in enforcing our Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act. And we're also tasked with advising the legislature on improvements needed for human rights. In our fiscal year 23 annual report, we did recommend the addition of immigration status and citizenship as legally protected classes in all of our anti-discrimination protections. And we continue to support the addition of these protected categories in our statutes today.
Is it true that citizenship isn't national origin or something like that in some of our statutes already, or is it not there as a protected class?
It is not expressly protected under our existing statutes. What we have that's close but does not cover the same type of situations is national origin.
National origin.
So national origin, and I'm happy to get into some of the distinctions that I think it's important to understand about the difference between what we have right now, which is national origin protection kind of only in terms of this area of our community members. So national origin also has been pretty narrowly construed by the federal courts to not include immigration status or citizenship, and really is only about where a person is from, what country a person is from, or what country their ancestors are from. So it really doesn't touch on immigration status or citizenship. And there are scenarios we can envision where someone could be denied protections under our current statute if we didn't add these.
So if someone said to me, Mahali, you're Hungarian, aren't you? And I said, well, of Hungarian origin. They say, I don't rent with Hungarians. That's illegal.
That's illegal.
But if they said, well, are you a US citizen? And I said, no, which of course I am, but said, no, that is not protected.
That is not expressly protected. Similarly, if you said, I'm here on a student visa, that is not protected. And that is a real concern. And I know that you've already heard from a lot of advocates and you've received a lot of public comments and testimony from the immigrant community and the organizations that are serving the immigrant community that are really close to the ground about what these folks are experiencing and what they've been historically experiencing, especially here in Vermont.
Can you go ahead?
No. You go ahead.
Can you similarly distinguish for us the difference between citizenship and immigration status? In other words, it's that I'm a little less clear about. I mean, it would seem to me that if I'm a landlord and say, well, are you a citizen? And I said, well, if I was the tenant, no. Isn't that the same as immigration status? What are the differences?
I think that immigration status has more subcategories than citizenship does. So there's, several different categories of immigration status that a person can have. They can be here on a work visa. They can be here on a student visa. They can have a green card, and they can be undocumented. Those are some of
Asylum seeker.
and seeking asylum. There are thank you. I knew there was another one I was leaving out. And those are the categories of
I see.
immigration status.
So all of those categories, the ones you just named, citizenship protects someone from being discriminated against on the basis of their not being a citizen. But they
Or
would
being a
not be
citizen of a
protected,
different country.
right, but they would not be protected if they were not a citizen, but were these other categories.
Right.
So if I had a green card, I wouldn't be protected under in other words, someone couldn't discriminate against me because I wasn't a citizen, right, under citizenship,
Correct.
right?
Right.
But would I be protected without, I'm just trying to see what protects me more.
I think that both are important, and in the states that have passed these protections, they have both, not one or the other. I think that the varying immigration statuses that a person can have are separate and distinct from a citizenship standpoint. And, you know, the concern would be a landlord or even a hotel, because we're also talking about public
Right.
accommodations, saying, I'm not going to serve someone who has a green card. And that wouldn't go to citizenship, that would go to that specific status. And we would want to ensure that we're protecting as many people as we can, right? That we're always trying to grow our civil rights laws, because we recognize that as they were first passed in the 60s, that we've had to continually take a look at them and make sure that we're covering all of our bases and protecting as many people as need protection. And the reality is that in our office, we are not seeing very many members of this community, the immigrant community, seeking out our services yet. And that gives me pause, because when I hear from Migrant Justice and when I hear from other advocates from this community, they're experiencing a high level of discrimination, and they either don't believe that the laws will protect them, or they don't trust the systems that we have for protecting them. And this legislation really can have an impact on helping those crucial, beloved members of our community know that we are here to protect them too, that they are just as safe as the rest of us are in asserting their rights to housing and their rights to like freely access all of our places of public accommodation, our businesses, our hospitals, our schools, and so on.
And I think that one of the things that I was interested to learn is also that these categories, these protected categories, it's also about the assumption that somebody belongs to this category, right? So it could help an actual citizen assert their rights. It could actually help a citizen of this country or somebody who might have dual citizenship, right? That somebody could impute that, you know, you are serving the interests of your other citizenship. So it could be, you know, you're a Chinese national, or you're a blah, 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 whatever. And so I don't want to serve you or rent to you or house you. Even if you also happen to be a citizen of the US, or you happen to have a green card in this country. You know, I get this a lot as a Canadian dual national. No, I'm just lighten up the mood.
Maybe not here, but.
Thank you, Gail.
Maybe not.
You're good. Yeah, maybe I don't.
You mind?
No.
So the reason I paused is because you have just answered the question I was going to ask is, unfortunately, we know what's already happening right now.
Right.
It doesn't sound like you're receiving claims and. So I guess my question's twofold. Uh, Because I don't want to make an assumption, and we know there are people out there who make these decisions maliciously. And unfortunately, working in HR, that's always going to happen, and I know that. I think part of the issue, and from what I'm seeing in the emails that I'm getting are from landlords saying, well, and we kind of talked about it, that we have to ask for a social security number, and if they're afraid, because right now they're like, well, evictions are really hard, and I don't know any landlord who is in the business of evicting. They want good tenants, and I think that's just a tool in their toolbox to make sure that they get the right fit. But I think in this instance, there is an assumption that if someone doesn't have a social security number, there's an assumption of what that means about their immigration status. And while this is probably very naive of me to say, I'm saying from my own, like, how I would feel about it is, well, it's like, okay, so what? Like, just, let's keep moving on, let's do the application. But I think landlords are really afraid of what that means for them. And there is this idea that, well, if somebody is here undocumented, they are breaking a law. And there is a concern of, what does that mean for me? And is there a way that we can, almost like teaching, like, how do we do outreach to landlords? Saying, here are your options, here, let's move forward here, but also to this group of individuals who are obviously facing these discriminations, but they're not reaching out. So it's kind of like there's two parties here that I think need coaching. And I know how over your skis you guys are right now. But maybe I'm just speaking out loud, but it's just kind of some of the things that have come up in my conversations and the emails that I'm getting. Is I just think there are a fair amount of landlords out there who are doing this because they're afraid, because they don't know what it means for them, and they don't get it.
Right. Well, I do think that it's important that the community that's trying to serve the immigrant population, including the Human Rights Commission,
Yeah.
If this law takes effect this year, that we all will, I have no doubt, we will all be working together to get out more public education and awareness about these protections. And there are lots of ways that our office provides training specifically to property managers and landlords. Yeah, I do. So we do a free virtual training. We used to do it every month. Now I had to pull back a little bit, so I do it every other month. I have one coming up on Monday in case you want to register. It's a 3-hour training that covers all the basics of fair housing under Vermont law. And it really is geared towards landlords and property managers, the folks who might be held liable under the act. And it's an opportunity for them to speak directly with me or with an investigator at our office and ask the questions that are hot for them right now. And then I think CVOEO is another partner in, getting the word out about fair housing rights and responsibilities. And, we're all kind of in that together. We see that be well received. I'm also often invited to speak at, like last year, I spoke at the Property Managers Association annual meeting, and to kind of give them like, here's what's up right now. Here's what I think I'm hearing that you all need to know more about, and kind of doing our best to get the word out. I think it's a really important part. And I think there's still today a lot of landlords that don't understand anything about the Fair Housing Act, let alone additional protections that might be added. And we're really committed to doing that work going forward.
Great. No, I think that's great. Like I said, it's kind of one of my concerns is what happens if this passes and where do we go from there?
Yeah, so, and I was doing some research preparing for this today, and 4 big states have passed these types of legal protections already and have been on the books for many years. California, New York, Illinois, Washington State. Huge populations of immigrant communities, way more than anything that we're dealing with. And several of those statutes also have even more restrictions on what landlords can and cannot do, including expressly saying that it's harassment. It's a civil rights violation if you report somebody's immigration status, someone who's applied for housing with you, and you report their status to a federal agency. Like, there's even more things that these jurisdictions are imposing for liability for landlords, far beyond what this bill is envisioning. And I think it does strike the right balance. And in my, understanding of a lot of application processes is that if someone who doesn't have a social security number is faced with a housing application that asks for a social security number, that's very likely to be an automatic barrier for them. And they are not going to apply for that housing out of concern that they have to now go to explain why they don't have a social security number, produce some documentation about their status, or be questioned or have ICE called on them just because they don't fill in that line. And we don't want to be putting folks who are already facing a lot of barriers in Vermont, especially around language and other things, to experience that, like allow them to have other ways that their identity can be verified. Certainly in other countries, nobody's providing social security numbers, nobody's still doing credit checks. Like, there's other ways. And I think that you've received a lot of testimony and public comments about what are the other ways that you can verify somebody's credit history or do a background check without needing a social security number.
Other questions? Tom?
Yeah, questions and thoughts. I mean, there's several layers to the issue, some of which we can address and some of which are federal and some of which are just culture wide. At this level, is there, if you're familiar with filling out an I-9, which is an employment, the employers are required to do this. You can provide a social security number, or there are a whole list of other things that can be provided. And I'm partly curious to know if that form or a similar form would give enough information to a landlord to comfortably identify and do your background checks and everything else. It would work for documented immigrants, and it probably wouldn't for undocumented immigrants. So, and I'm looking for a balance between the concerns that landlords have and how much can we cover in the changes that we make. The concerns about undocumented workers are wider than just the landlord issue. And I will make no comment on how well it's being done, but at the federal level, a lot of those things need to be resolved somehow. Before, to address pushback as opposed to just from the landlords. So what I'm thinking, I can, it's easy to get a copy of an I-9, is how many people are we talking about who have some kind of immigration status, but not a citizen, not a social security number, versus how many people are we talking about who have no documentation? I mean, how many people would we be able to help if we are at least addressing the ones that have a green card or tax ID number or something other than? Any idea what proportion of people were?
I am not the person to ask about that question. I'm certain that there are folks who work with the immigrant population in Vermont who could be able to address that question more readily than I could. And I just want to clarify too, that folks who are undocumented, still have their identification of who they are. They came from a place that probably gave them identification, like they just don't have documentation about immigration status in the United States.
But can't they get a Vermont ID?
I honestly don't know
Okay,
that.
well, we'll find out.
Someone probably knows that.
I have a feeling they might even be in the room. Okay.
Someone who is in the room might know that.
Okay.
Well, then the homework is largely done for a landlord. May not have the resources to check somebody's ID from another country without paying an agency of some sort to do it, provider service. Okay, I will ask whoever you want to.
Okay. Well, we have one more witness on this. Big, is any other questions of Big? Yes, go ahead.
In your opinion, in your role, in your opinion, in your role as the executive director of the Human Rights Commission and as an attorney for the Human Rights Commission, do you think there's any kind of parenthetical, if we were past this, with regards to housing, do you think there's any kind of implied language access in terms of accommodations for people who will be covered by this?
Often language, speaking a different language can be encompassed by national origin discrimination anyway. So I wouldn't think that it's adding any new expectation around language access. I think
National origin is already.
national origin is already protected, and often someone not speaking English will be, and being discriminated against because of that, will be covered by national origin. I don't know that all courts would interpret it that way. We would certainly interpret it that way. But the language piece, I think, is already a concern, that we would want, that isn't necessarily discrimination, but it may erect barriers for folks. And if we're trying to be inclusive, welcoming landlords, that we want to be mindful about language access. And certainly our office, it has a lot of room to grow on language access and having the resources to provide services to all folks in an easy way.
Just a real quick question. You said California, New York, and Washington State. What was the other state?
Illinois.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Big before we go to our next witness? Okay, thank
I
you.
was a very quick one about, do you mind?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you see, I'm just trying to think in terms of, a lot increasingly the employer provided housing in our state, especially with folks that are, either on dairy farms or, doing construction work. Can you speak a little bit about how this might help between the education that you guys are engaged in and situations, to be able to make lives better for folks, how this would affect our workforce?
Yeah, I think that the hope is that having these additional protections will help those workers feel more secure in filing complaints when they do experience discrimination in their housing related to employment, or when they go out in the communities in which they're working and experience discrimination or harassment there. I think that there's so much vulnerability that these community members have experienced over the last several decades here in Vermont, that there is a concern that they are not trusting or feeling safe about our systems to report discrimination that they are experiencing now. So I think and while our country is kind of going through an increase in anti-immigrant sentiment, there's really a concern that harassment that these folks might experience is going to escalate over the next several years. And I think it's really important that while we have concerns about landlord fears, we keep in mind immigrant fears as maybe as important as landlord fears.
Thank you very much, Big. Appreciate your coming in as usual. Our next witness is from Vermont Legal Aid, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen, I don't think you've been here this year, have you?
I have not, no.
Then I think I'll have the committee introduce itself to you.
I can kick it off. Rep Krasnow, Chittenden and South Burlington.
I think Sadia Lamont, Lamoille, Washington District, Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, and a small part of Scott.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Windsor One, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland City District 6.
Good morning, Gal Pezzo, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
Hi, I'm Representative Debbie Dolgan. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Tom Charlton, I represent Athens, Chester, Grafton.
Hi, Leonora Dodge. I represent the city of Essex Junction and the town of Essex.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Bartley. I serve Fairfax in Georgia.
And I'm Mark Mahoney. I represent Callis and Plainfield and Marshfield. I don't think it was deliberate, but it turns out that this committee represents a very wide swath of the state and different population types as well. From very rural to very urban, to the extent we have very urban here. So please tell us your name.
It's all relative.
B is going, Mary is going a little bit farther.
Compared to Hong Kong.
Right.
You want to tell us your name and take it away, Mary Ellen?
Okay. My name is Mary Ellen Griffin. I'm a staff attorney at Legal Aid. Let me see if I can get my. Yeah, how do, did I always do this wrong? There we go. And I do have some handouts. Yay, because some of the. You want handouts, okay, good. Just pass them around. It's just some of the documents don't show up that well on the PowerPoint.
Are these available on the web, Mary Ellen?
They're posted.
They're posted? Okay, we're.
Oh,
great.
are the slides posted too?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Got it.
So I'm here today to talk about the Service Member Civil Relief Act and its use of social security numbers. I do want to say, as regards to in general in H-169, this is certainly something that Legal Aid supports. We definitely think that adding some citizenship and immigration status is important. But my colleague Rachel Batterson is available to testify if you want to hear from Legal Aid on the fair housing implications. I know you just heard from Big, but I'm here only just prepared to talk about social security numbers.
Thank you.
The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a federal act that's designed to protect people actively defending our country. So there's a couple of different parts of that act, but the part that I think is relevant to H-169 is the protection against default judgments. So a default judgment is a judgment that somebody gets against the person who didn't show up in court. So I sue you because you owe me money and you don't file anything to defend, you don't come to court. So I sort of win kind of automatically. But one of the things you have to file to win a default judgment is to say, I've complied with the Service Member Civil Relief Act. The idea there is we don't want people getting default judgments against someone while they're off, putting themselves in the line of fire to defend our country, right? So you have to say, I know this person isn't in the military and this is how I know. So there are two main ways to say that you know the person is not actively serving in the military. The first is that you can search a Department of Defense website. Or you can say, I have personal knowledge. So here's a sample motion for default judgment. There's a sample in your packet as well. This is actually for a small claims case, but I don't know. You can see it pretty well, actually. Number 3. So you can say, I know this because I saw him walking down the street yesterday, or my kids play soccer together. We were standing on the sidelines yesterday, or whatever. Or you can say, I searched the database. To search the database does not require a social security number. It's explicit in the user guide. I gave you a link. The social security number is not required. If you have the social security number, they certainly encourage you to use the social security number when you're searching the database because it makes it more accurate, but it's explicitly not required. When you're searching the database, if you're someone like me who does it rarely, this is the page that you get to. And it says at the top, SSN is not required. Specifically, they don't want people gathering social security numbers solely for the purpose of complying with the Service Member Civil Relief Act. If you have it, use it, but don't gather it just for that purpose, is what the website says. Here's an example of one, it's also in your packet, that I filed.
Go ahead.
That I filed getting a default judgment actually against the landlord where I didn't have his social security number. So you can see its social security number is blank. I put in his name and his birthday. Actually, in that case, there's also a sample in the packet. I had my client file something saying, I saw Fred hitchhiking yesterday in Linden, so that would have worked as well. There's also a sample in your packet of a landlord who has tenants sign that they're not in the military and then attaches that to say that I've complied with the Service Member Civil Relief Act. So that's all I have. I mean, I think that if the short answer is no, you don't need a social security number to comply with the Service Member Civil Relief Act.
So if I might ask, so you went pretty quick.
Sorry.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I've got it right. When you fill out the form, you put in their first name, their last name, and their date of birth.
Yes.
So you do need date of birth, obviously, and what happens with somebody,
Yeah.
if you ever have a problem of, the John Smith or, Alejandro Gomez problem, where there's thousands of them who were born on the same day, because there's millions of them is that a problem?
I haven't had that problem. I think there's a couple of different ways around that. One is you could say, I know Alejandro Gomez isn't in the military because whatever reason. Do you know?
You could ask, I understand you could ask you could just put on your application form, I am or am not a member of the military. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is that if you can't determine if the person is in the military or not, you can still comply with, I should have said that, with the Service Member Civil Relief Act by just saying, I've been unable to determine. If you do that, the judge can order a bond, can say, I want a bond paid to make sure that you're not getting a judgment against someone in the military. The statute says may, so that, you could work something out with the judge. But you still can get your judgment. It's just, they want some protection to make sure if the person shows up 2 years from now and says, I was in the military, like that's why you got this default judgment, that they can undo it. So I haven't done that many of them, so I don't know what would happen if it was John Smith, and there's a million birthdays. But I think there's other ways. You could say, I know the person's not in the military because they're, I don't know, whatever you would know about them. I think in a landlord.
65, right.
Yeah, in a landlord-tenant relationship, most landlords know enough about their tenant to know sort of like, I don't know.
Is it legal to ask someone's age? No. Okay,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Okay.
But we asked for date of birth.
Date of birth. Oh, that's true. You know
Math, I
the-
guess.
Yeah, right, sorry. Wasn't even. Tom, go ahead, and then Debbie.
Just to clarify something, it notes in the margin of that
Yeah.
document, that without a social security number, DMVC cannot authoritatively assert that this is the same individual where it refers to, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's all you have to work with, then it generates that next form with the seal on it. Can that be done? Will that satisfy the court that you've done your due diligence and, okay, they
Yes.
realize it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I think if there were a lot of Fred Franklins with that birthday, it might be harder, or maybe the judge would say like, well, how do you know? And, but no, the judge didn't even blink at that one.
Debbie,
Well, no, we just went to court and on our lease, we have it that they sign that they're not in the military. And this lease wasn't even like 6 months old. And, we put that in with our documents and the judge would not take it. He said, we have to do this form here.
Yeah, so judge has taken it a bunch of times before.
Well, he didn't.
Not
take
that
it
judge,
then.
but that, yeah, because it's
that's the
old,
other
because you have to
thing.
stay.
It's that judge.
Yeah, I noticed that you had filed a bunch of those. And I was surprised that the judge took them because some of them were years old. And I think the point is to say the person's not in the military at the time you're getting the judgment.
Right, exactly. And that, social security numbers is the fastest, easiest, 100%, the judge will take it.
Yeah. But and certainly the military doesn't want people just gathering social security numbers to be able to search the database. They're very clear in all their, both in the user guide and right when you enter it is don't gather the social security number solely to comply with the Service Member Civil Relief Act.
Is it possible for the renter to provide this, do the search and provide it themselves?
I mean, a default, they're not around, right? That's the point. This is a very specific.
Or
worst
before
case
they leave,
scenario.
or before
Yeah,
they go.
sure, right.
Before they're deployed.
I mean, often people are around, they just don't answer the complaint. So like in my case, the landlord just didn't, I mean, he was served, he just didn't answer, right? He just didn't come to court.
Happens a lot.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
People are just like, I don't want to be bothered, or yeah, I probably owe the money, so people don't show up to court, so they're around. You could ask them, but if you could ask them, then you could say, I saw them yesterday. I know they're not in the military because I talked to them yesterday.
And so it's in the, you're verifying that at the moment of the decision, they are not. So even getting somebody to say, I'm not in the military, or I am in the military when they sign the lease is meaningless because they could have enrolled by the time of the.
I mean, I saw a bunch of Dolgan Realty cases, a couple, maybe two, where they had done it years earlier
Yeah.
and a judge accepted it. But I'm hearing that the judge isn't accepting it, which I think is more correct. I was surprised the judge had taken it a couple other times.
Right.
Because it's at the time you're seeking the motion for default. That to show like I've tried to figure out if the person's in the military or not. Either I have determined or I have not determined. So again, like you can say I have not been able to determine and still get your default judgment. It's just the judge has discretion there to say, I'm going to do something to protect the person in case they really do turn out to be in the military.
It just sounds, yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's an attempt on, maybe on, on Debbie, on your part, it sounds like there was an attempt to be like, okay, we just want to be on the safe side, make sure we're respecting our tenants' rights, should this ever happen, come to pass, because we've had to deal with it in the past or whatever. And it didn't go the way you expected. They were like, this isn't good enough. So you're kind of like, wow, what am I supposed to do then? So I get your concern.
Right.
But it sounds like, even that there are other ways that even if you don't have a social, that it's understood that you should be specifically asking for it to deal with this potential situation. And it's recognized that there are other ways around.
Well,
Yeah.
it would seem to me, I have a question. From what your testimony is, it would
Yes.
seem to me that with the information of first and last name and date of birth, you can search this database.
Yes.
And that should be sufficient.
Yes.
The only thing I've heard that would say it's not, and you have to do that pretty much when you file a complaint, rather than years earlier.
No, you do it when you file the motion for default
Or
judgment.
the motion for default judgment. Okay. So it would seem to me from what you've said, the only problem is if I were to uncover 20 John Smiths with that date of birth, then I would fill out a form that says I am unable to determine, and here's why. There's 20 John Smiths. I don't know if this person is one of them. What you're saying is I could get a judgment, but it would be up to the judge to decide whether they wanted me to post a bond.
Mhm.
What is the bond theoretically for?
It's to protect John Smith. Let's see. I don't know.
In other words, so John Smith emerges, my John Smith emerges 2 years later and says, wait a minute, I don't want this judgment on my record. I was in the military. What does the bond do?
So it's in the statute. So on the first page of the handout that I gave you, under 3, part B3, if the defendant is later found to be in military service, the bond shall be available to indemnify the defendant against any loss or damage the defendant may suffer by reason of any judgment for the plaintiff against the defendant, should the judgment be set aside in whole or in part.
Have you ever had such a bond set?
No. No, never. And I think that if you had multiple names, I would assume that there's probably a way to tell like where the person was originally from, like where they. So you could say like, well, there was a John Smith who was from California, and there's a John Smith from Idaho, and I can tell you that this isn't. I don't think these are my John Smiths. And you know, when I knew him, he never expressed any interest in the military, and I think it's unlikely. So maybe the judge would say, okay, I'm gonna have a very small bond or no bond. I think in theory, if you get a default judgment against someone who's in the military, they could probably come back and undo it. But I've never seen that happen. And I've not actually seen a judge reject a motion for default before. I've seen him say, like, no, you have to go search the database. Go search the database and give me the printout. So.
Other questions? Yes,
Have you
Debbie.
ever done a case with just the name?
No, I haven't.
You mean just the
Date of
name?
birth.
and
Yeah,
no date of
just,
birth?
well, no, you have the name and the date of birth, and then, you know, you present that to the judge. I didn't know how willing judges would
Yes,
take that.
That's what this one is. So Fred Franklin, you probably know Fred. I think he's in your district.
Probably.
Yeah. So we had a judgment against Fred. We were just renewing the judgment. He didn't appear. And I filed that, and it doesn't have the social security number. I didn't have it. I don't know it. So like a tenant suing a landlord would never have the social security number, right? Like we don't, like tenants don't get landlord social security numbers.
Right.
I don't think you'd want to require landlords to disclose their social security number to a tenant, right?
That seemed a little- Tax idea.
I heard.
It's a very interesting question, but one I have to confess I have not thought of.
I haven't thought of that either. That is an interesting.
You just gave us a new idea. No.
But certainly a tenant can get a judgment
So
against.
what you're saying,
Without.
her question to you was, have you ever done this? Your answer is yes.
I've done it with a birthday, a name and a birthday. And actually I figured out his birthday, like searching the internet. And that also makes sense because I mean, I know him, but his other court records he had filed, he put his birthday in. So I got it from that.
Okay.
And just to clarify, just because my own little nervous Nelliness, that's a medical term. It's okay that we are discussing this individual's case on our live stream. I just want to be sure that.
I wondered that too, but then I thought.
It's too
maybe
late
it's
now,
public
guys.
record.
Yeah, why don't you take that off the, I think that,
It's not,
yeah, the only,
that's uncomfortable.
yeah,
if it
well,
is.
I don't know. I do want to say, I think that this is an interesting question because it's not just landlord tenant. There are all kinds of litigation in which the defendant just doesn't show up for all kinds of reasons. And it would be, I think, and you never know their social security number because we don't require that in most situations. It's just not that kind of a relationship. And I would assume without knowing that the courts would not administer this in a way that would just left and right be preventing default judgments. They're too much, unfortunately, too much a part of the landscape. Usually when people are at fault for the reasons stated in the complaint, they don't bother responding. They may sometimes go to a legal aid attorney and say, I don't have any money, how long have I got? Or something like that, but there's all kinds of, it's a very common thing that there's defaults.
I mean, it's so common that there's a form for small claims. And I think that's where it's, so I sold my neighbor a pig and the pig died the next day and I want my $100 or whatever, I don't know my neighbor's social security number. I can get my judgment for $100. Not that anyone does that. I'm trying to think of but the small claims is anything under $10,000.
I thought it was 5,000.
It went up.
Just to follow up here, use date of birth. We're talking about, but did I not hear you say that you can't ask how old somebody is?
I don't think it's
I don't
think
age discrimination.
But you can ask for their birthday?
Don't ask me. Well, just because, if you're like me, you don't know how old they are just from the date of birth. No, I don't know the answer.
You can ask for it for identity, to establish identity, right? To be able to know who this person is, but you can't then turn around and say, I don't know, I don't, unless,
You're
like under
probably-
21 or whatever, unless that's the reason.
I strongly suspect you are uncovering yet another internal contradiction and ambiguity in the way that we just live with, which is that in lots of situations, people are asked for their DOB, their driver's license, give me your driver's license and, let me make a copy,
So,
and yet at the same time, if you were ever to refuse to, oh, I see you're 60 years old, bye, that's illegal,
Anything over 40 is age discrimination.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't-
It's not, it's not.
I don't have to hire 20.
Oh, it's not?
That's correct for federal employment law.
Oh, that's your.
I got another
Okay.
couple weeks.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Oh,
No, I was
Debbie.
gonna say, this is just, the Servicemen Civil Relief Act is only for civil cases when you go to civil court. So small claims, you wouldn't need it. Correct?
No, small claims is a
They still need
subdivision.
that?
Yeah, small claims is
Okay.
part of the civil division. So you can see right up at the top.
Yep,
It's just a court of the civil division.
okay,
Can I ask you a question?
so you always need it.
Is everything that you shared with us public record and on the, open to the public?
I mean,
If not, it's really uncomfortable that you've listed names of people in these documents and that they're posted on our website now and shared on the screen, so I would advise next
Well,
time. to think about
now that I think of it, the default judgment, again, the default judgment is a public record.
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I'm asking, is
Yeah, so
everything
the-
is?
they're all court records.
They're all
Okay,
pub- so
just
they're all
making
public.
sure.
Yeah, okay. You're okay, we're okay. Other questions? Hey, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your testimony. We have 5 minutes, 7 minutes. What I would suggest, and then we're going to take this up again for committee discussion next week. We will take it up just because, first of all, because I know you're all thrilled at the idea of committee discussion, but also really, the Senate housing bill. Remember, it contains things ours doesn't contain, and ours contains things theirs doesn't. The Senate housing bill has a version of our H 169 in it. It's much more bare bones and it's different. But so that's another reason why we have to sort of come to terms with how we feel about this issue. But I don't mind starting off just for 5 minutes. If anyone wants to just talk a little bit, we can have a little conversation now, knowing we're just going to go on with it. But I'd like to know how we've heard a lot of testimony. We've all learned a lot about this and may have been somewhat surprised by what we learned. But just what are your thoughts so far with the idea? Remember, you can say whatever you want and nothing is final until we vote.
27.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay, we're on one.
no, we're on S
That's
169.
169.
H 169.
H169. Okay,
Um,
yeah, you're next. With Tom.
I'd like to know more about the state ID that an undocumented worker can get and how much that enables a landlord to do what they feel they need to do. Because I can see a path to verify documented immigrants without a social security number, but I want to see what we can do. And along with that is a question of, are they comfortable getting that ID? What do they need to provide? Are they apprehending, if they're here illegally, are they just nervous that if they go get this thing, they're going to be exposed? I mean, how prevalent is it for somebody in that community to actually have the ID?
Okay, so that's a registered question, which I will just repeat.
I wrote it down.
You did? Great. Okay. What state ID is available? Is it available to people who are undocumented? And would they have objective as opposed to subjective reason Because clearly they could have a subjective fear, but would they have an objective reason to fear?
And is that ID sufficient for a landlord?
Right, and is it?
Do the background they have to.
Okay.
Got it.
Other thoughts? Debbie?
Well, I just wanted to calm Emily down. You can go to the court and print out.
No, I know, I got it.
So,
We
It's all
have
right
had
there.
situations,
Thanks,
Debbie.
Debbie, for.
We actually had a
I'm still
situation.
calm.
I was, yeah,
We
I,
had a situation here actually this year where material was presented, which I wasn't sharp enough to take down fast enough that we shouldn't have done.
I'm just extra cautious about
Yeah.
people's.
yeah, I asked that question precisely just to also have on the record that it was okay for us to be doing this because I wanted to be
Debbie.
sure.
While you have the floor, do you have any thoughts on the bill to?
169.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, yeah, citizenship, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. But immigration status, there's just so many different levels to it. And I think it can put some people in a position they may not want to be in, not knowing exactly what level somebody's on.
Mean what?
Well, I mean, you don't want to be accused of doing something illegal.
So
If-
the liability of the landlord, like, is the landlord liable, right?
Well, or
That was-
subject to a claim of discrimination when they're not.
Right,
No,
like,
I
we're
thought you were
either-
saying-
we're
Versus
not
the federal.
discriminating because of that, or we don't feel, comfortable having an undocumented, immigrant with, like, you might not just feel comfortable with that. And, you might be accused of harboring somebody that's here illegally, and then you're in trouble too. And I mean, social security numbers are used in other areas, for background checks and things of that nature. And we had testimony, you can do it other ways, and they testified that may not give you all the information you're looking for. And as a landlord, the more information you have about your potential tenant, the better you can fit them into an apartment. You can say, oh, this would be great for you guys over here. We have something available. Or, we'll have to check on zoning if we can put 10 people in a 3-bedroom apartment, things of that nature. I mean, the way I look at it, landlords are in the business to make money and they want to rent their apartments. So, I mean, and we don't want to do evictions.
Other initial reactions. This is all we're just trying to begin to get, yes.
So how is let's look at it from the landlord's perspective. How is the landlord protected from harboring an illegal? If we look at it from that end,
An illegal what?
illegal immigrant.
Okay.
An undocumented.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
it is more politically correct to say
Oh, right. Just to
undocumented,
be
but I wanted to say
clear, yeah.
that's
illegal.
fine.
That's fine, yeah. Well, this is
How
committee
are
discussion.
they?
Yeah, I thought that we had.
There are
somebody-
exceptions in it.
Oh, yeah.
And the Champlain Housing Trust was the first to mention that they would like to have a section that says, it mentions adherence to federal law. And then there were everybody else who's come in to talk about, maybe the exception of Big Hartman, but I don't know, I wasn't here for your whole testimony, but most people have come in saying we'd like to include some kind of exemption for federal adherence to federal law.
But if I'm remembering correctly, Angela had made the argument that if somebody is here undocumented, that is against federal.
I think that
I'll tell you what she said.
I think the point is that this would cover people who have because we're not saying you can't discriminate based on being undocumented. We're saying based on migratory status. And so that could include people who have the legal right to be here,
Absolutely.
but you just may not, you know, for not a financial reason at all, just a bias, right? This is what this is about. When you're there, when you don't have a financial reason, but you have a bias, that's where this law would kick in. And
I
so
wouldn't quite
if
put
you
it
have
that
a
way.
green card, and the person says, no, I wouldn't rent to a student with a green card.
Well, Rep. Dodd, with all due respect, I wouldn't quite frame it that way.
What do you mean?
That it's based on bias necessarily, because that's kind of assuming people's intent.
I'm creating a scenario. I'm not imputing a bias to anyone in particular. This is a hypothetical scenario.
Right, yeah, I understand that. I think one answer to your question, I'm just in discussion. Right now, I think the answer is what we would do is create a pathway for an individual to demonstrate the information that a landlord needs in order to determine their identity, do a background check, and do a credit check. There is no affirmative obligation in federal or state law for a landlord to have to verify the immigration status of an individual. That doesn't exist yet. And consequently, if we were to create that and a landlord says, let me see your ID, with social security or other, and is able to verify their ID, so that they can do the due diligence that a landlord normally does. That's the beginning and end of their obligation. They have no affirmative obligation to determine their immigration status. Say that it is subsequently discovered let's say that the federal government discovers that that person was undocumented and comes after them. There's no basis in law now for the federal government to assert that the landlord is liable, because the landlord has no affirmative obligation
To begin
thank
with.
God, to go after finding out what their immigration status is. And if, in my opinion, God forbid, that law should change and suddenly we should all be deputized to try to find that kind of thing out. The savings clause is if you're forced to do something one way under federal law and another under state law, the federal law trumps. And that is, I think, the only answer I could give to your question, is that it isn't an affirmative obligation on the part of the landlord to determine immigration status. It is I think, not an obligation, a financial obligation on the part of the landlord to determine what they need to determine to make a fair contractual decision, and we have to recognize that somehow.
Just to clarify, what Angela did say was that landlords shouldn't be forced to comply with a state law that conflicts with a federal law, such as immigration status. And then she also said, where is it? Where is it? Because she said, that would make me less mad. The part that would make her less mad was, we can put a flag that we need to find that out.
Yeah. Also, so here's what I think I'd like to do next week. First of all, I think we need a little more testimony on
That question.
forms of ID and what they mean and what's involved in getting them. And we'll talk to people, including you guys, and try to figure out who the right people to make that testimony is. The second is, I think we should have more discussion. And as part of that discussion, I've heard a lot of things from a lot of people, including some, and I'll throw out some possible different you know how I've done this before in my role of chair, just trying to give us options this is not a simple matter. This is a multifaceted matter. And I've also talked, we've had correspondence from Chris Delia, remember Chris? He's the banker. We've had subsequent correspondence with Chris. I've had an email to him, which I found somewhat incomprehensible. And then I stopped him in the hall and made him tell me what he meant, and I'll report that. And, I'm just gonna try to give you guys more concrete options to discuss, but we will discuss this, okay?
Do we know what other countries do as far as, do they have social security?
Yeah, they almost all have identification numbers.
I can give it, I lived in the Czech Republic for about 5 years. And it was right before the EU had everything all centralized. But you had to, in the Czech Republic and in a lot of EU countries at the time, you had to provide your criminal record in order to be able to get an ID card, even a temporary green card. And in the United States, you don't have a criminal record until you commit a crime.
Right.
So it was a circular question because it wasn't possible to get a statement that you'd never committed a crime because our country's too big for that. But also, so they have had it so that it's exclusionary for certain countries just by the nature of paperwork.
Yeah, the paperwork in many countries, most countries that I know of, everybody has an ID number of some sort or another, and very often your medical records are attached to it, all kinds of records are attached to it. Many places don't have the privacy concerns we do, and many places are not as open as we are to immigration or immigrants, whether they are documented or undocumented. So it just depends on the country.
It does.
I think we are at an end for today, so we will reconvene, and it looks like we will be convening at 9:00.
Oh,
No, after the floor, that's right, the floor and the
Afternoon.
caucuses, so we start at 1. We will be starting at 1:00.